So I am joined with a man you may have heard something about. Zack is the leader of the Green Party of England and Wales, not slept, entirely powered by adrenaline, I would imagine at this point. Why does this matter, Zack? Some people go by-elections, elections. Why does this change things?
It matters hugely because this is going to transform the face of British politics. And before specifying exactly why, I think the alternatives are worth looking at. So we could be waking up today to a Labour win. They could have held on. We know Keir Starmer would have taken that as, I might be unpopular, but at the end of the day, the left have got nowhere to go. People have got no alternative. We'll just keep on going. And that would have been absolutely disastrous for the entire political system because we would have just carried on through years of this sludge. Alternatively, the unthinkable could have happened. We could have got a pretty awful grifter extremist from Reform as the new MP. And that would have been deeply dangerous in terms of just the thought of Nigel Farage all over TV this morning being insufferable would have been awful. But also, Keir Starmer would have taken that as, I just haven't been right-wing enough. There's not enough migrants or trans people. I haven't made their life harder. So, I'm going to just get even worse. But what's actually happened is a local plumber. And it's important to say, by the way, there's the politics of this, and then there's a side note that Hannah Spencer's just bloody incredible, and that really matters. Like, it matters for the Green Party and anyone in the Green Party, but frankly, I think it matters for the country that there's now an incredibly articulate working-class woman who is going to be in Parliament holding people to account, who also, by the way, is incredibly funny, and I think that's understated in politics too, when someone can cut through with humour. And so there's a few things that have gone on here. There's the kind of wider political context where the Green Party now have they've shown that they can defeat both Reform and Labour in elections. So Labour can no longer use the wasted vote argument or vote for us because of this other scary party. Because we've demonstrated where you vote Green, when we're resourced on the ground, when nearly 2,000 volunteers came out yesterday, we win. And then there's the much more kind of short-term thing of just the fact the Green Party now have this extra MP, Hannah Spencer, who's going to be phenomenal, who I think is going to cut through on the airwaves and reach lots of people who maybe don't yet know about the Green Party or have only just started to be finding out.
In terms of, lots of people who voted Labour all their lives, and actually, frankly, their parents, grandparents, great-grandparents vote for the Green Party for the first time. A lot of Labour people go, oh, well, it's because they're angry about Andy Burnham, that's why they didn't vote for the Labour Party. What do you think? What did you, just by talking to people there, what did you find were the main reasons people who voted Labour abandon their old party? Was it, were there key reasons that you thought cut through?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is vague. A lot of it is just like very unhappy with Keir Starmer. They don't think he's got any values or principles, a general sense. I mean, we've had 15 U-turns. I think it's always important to say if you have one U-turn, as an opposition politician, it's churlish to be like, you've changed your mind on something, because actually often we want politicians to change their minds on things. But the fact that you ran under the coattails of Jeremy Corbyn, ditched all of those pledges, ditched many pledges before he got into government, and then government has just been nothing but U-turns, shows, I was about to say that he doesn't stand for anything, but he actually stands for a lot. He stands for the status quo, to protect his own career, to protect power and wealth. And he stands for a deep-seated authoritarianism. We see that with Palantir, the US tech spy company that's complicit in the genocide in Gaza through drones and data analytics, that he's also given, or Wes Streeting is giving contracts to the National Health Service with. So there's that kind of authoritarianism, but we also saw it with ID cards. We're seeing it with trying to scrap jury trials. It's not true to say there's not a political ideology there. There's something quite sinister that's running right throughout that. People would rarely phrase it like that, though. They'd often just say, I'm really sick. They'd often say, I'm sick of politics, and you get into it, and actually they're sick of the Labour Party and Conservative Party, and they either think Farage is interesting or they think he's awful, and then you kind of get into the conversation. It's still a problem that a lot of it is through the lens of Farage, so I still think there's work to do. There's definitely work to do to keep building up the left and keep building up the progressive movement, so Farage isn't constantly dominating the conversation, although we know in legacy media, because it's owned by the same billionaires, that Farage is protecting. That's tricky. That's why independent media, commentators, YouTubers, podcasts are really incredibly important, because actually we're building our own platforms, and I think it's way past time to keep building that strength. Other than that, the genocide did come up on people's doorsteps. And, on BBC News this morning, I can't remember the exact phrasing, but they said something to me like, is it appropriate to keep bringing up what's happening in Palestine? And it just, the fact that that's a question that people think they can ask on national TV and have any coherency or morality or dignity about, shows kind of how far we've fallen in terms of journalistic standards, but also, more importantly, in terms of the government and the political parties and what they're representing. there's this constant assumption that only Muslim communities care about what's happening in Palestine. And it's deeply offensive because whether it's a Muslim community, a Jewish community, or a non-faith community, it's also about human rights and dignity. And it seems to blow the minds of a certain set of people who largely own the media, but also sadly are elected politicians because they were corporate lobbyists who are now MPs, that anyone could actually care about human life. It always has to be some kind of cynical political play or has to be constant positioning because of a demographic, as opposed to there's a principal position to take it. And whether it's popular or unpopular, we'd still be taking it. And if it's unpopular, there's harder work to do to show leadership on that. But that's actually the point of politics.
I mean, linked to that, Matthew Goodwin has said that we are losing our country. A dangerous Muslim sectarianism has emerged. He's the defeated, of course, reform candidate, came a poor second. Nigel Farage says this election was a victory for sectarian voting and cheating. What do you say to that?
I mean, they're sore losers is a very important thing to say about that. First of all, they just lost an election quite badly, and they spent that entire election demanding that it was in their hands and demanding that they had more attention and riding cars around industrial estates with no one there. Talking about Mad Zack, Matt's not laughing anymore now. But being magnanimous in victory, as I remember to do while I'm sleepy, I think there's something much deeper and worrying here, which is this is racism. And I think it needs to be called as such and shouldn't be equivocated on. The idea that, first of all, that you can't talk to communities about the things that matter to them. That's literally what politics is connecting the things that people care about. I remember, again, being asked on TV why we're printing leaflets in Urdu, and my simple answer was because we're communicating with people that speak Urdu. And there's a wider point as well, which I think something incredible has happened in Gorton and Denton, which is incredibly hopeful and positive, which is a female plumber has just become a parliamentarian for a party that's led by a gay Jewish man in a constituency that's incredibly mixed and diverse. And actually in places like Denton, which demographically is more white working class, although we shouldn't just label areas, people live in all sorts of places. But the vote really held up in Denton too. And I think what that demonstrates is the unity of Hannah's message, the unity of the Green Party message. The fact that people are sick and tired of the protection of the super rich. They're sick and tired of seeing industrial war machines being rolled out in our name and all the money that's spent on people dying. And they're sick of our NHS or our water companies being privatized and sold down the river. And so it's something Hannah said earlier on in the campaign really stuck with me. That's the last thing I'd say on this. She started to say, I'm really amazed that so many people are coming out to campaign. And then she went, you know what? I'm not amazed. Because actually, things are so crap in this country. And a party's come along and said, it doesn't have to be this way. It's different. We're not bought and paid for. Join, campaign, do what you can, and things will be different. It's not actually surprising. People went, you know what? That's worth giving a go. I'm going to vote for it.
Speaking about being magnanimous, I can't even say the word. Keir Starmer's response, not that. He has done an angry, you've not seen it, I know yet. He's done an angry response in which he says this is going to renew his determination to take on what he says are the extremes of left and right. And I would note, he said the left with particular anger and venom. That's what he reserves his. What do you think about that? He's trying to say a horseshoe. That's what he's saying. He's horseshoeing.
Well, first of all, if he's renewing his determination to take on the right, then I'm scared about what determination looks like. Because every time Nigel Farage says jump, Keir Starmer says how high. It's not just morally repugnant. It's also politically absurd. Because if you keep appeasing the right, it's not like they go, oh, okay, we'll come a bit more to the center. They just get worse and worse and worse. And that's the exact doom spiral the country's on right now. But we know when we look at the Labour Party, people have been saying this for years, by the way. And these are people that knew a lot more than I did. And, you know, the Labour Party is not my monkeys, not my circus. It's kind of going on over there. But the brilliant work of Paul Holden, the exposure of Labour Together, the very clear evidence that is now being presented about alleged criminal activity, alleged corruption that was going on in the Labour Party, where the receipts are being published every single day, the Peter Mandelson affair. We know that the Labour Party, and in particular Keir Starmer, would do anything to protect the people around them. And actually, they despise the left. And I genuinely believe they would rather lose an election than even offer a few morsels to the left or even go in a better direction in this country. And that's not something I think is ideological, which would be bad enough. But I do think it's just a deep-seated hatred and tribalism that if they ever had to do that, they'd have to admit that their entire political project was deeply flawed. Their entire political project doesn't stand for anything. And actually, to use the meme, maybe they're the baddies.
Just a couple of other things, because I know we need to get some rest. I would at least hope at some point. But Labour ministers were briefing. They would have preferred a reform victory, because they feared this was existential if the Green Party won. Do you just want to explain? I mean, what is the strategy now in terms of, because it was a by-election, you can throw so much resources at one particular seat. This was 109th, I believe, on your target list. What's the
127.
strategy? Oh, sorry, I do apologize. What does facts report? But what's the strategy now to go out and what should Labour MPs be thinking?
Well, there's a few things. I think one of the kind of side quests of this whole campaign was Lucy Powell's weird open letters to me, which seems to have resulted in a very odd way of campaigning, which is this constant exchange of open letters, which I didn't particularly want to engage with, but you're aware when you're attacked, you need to respond. And Lucy will be getting a letter in the next few days, I do have to say. But actually, what I want someone to go back through those letters and look at the amount of lies and misinformation that were constantly repeated in those letters that now look absolutely absurd. We can't be in a place in a democracy where Labour can say things so completely ridiculous and absurd, lose an election, and then not be held to account for the things they were saying just 48 hours ago. Again, not to tangent too much, but Lee Harpin as well. Just at least Labour MPs kind of stopped around 10 p.m., but you've got commentators who are still kind of pushing things that are objectively not true, and just being publicly humiliated just literally minutes later. Anyway, putting that aside, I think that's the first thing, is Labour need to be held to account for what they did. Second, I think the manner in which they campaigned, they created a fake tactical voting website on the eve of poll and put that through every letterbox and every door. This would be bad enough if any political party did it, but this is the party that so often rides on the moral high horse of pointing fingers at every other party. On top of that, there's the pretty repugnant, on the day of the election, a van was going around the constituency with a picture of me and Hannah Spencer on it, talking about us wanting to send people's daughters to prostitution and all sorts of kind of wild nonsense about drugs, drug death being a really serious issue in this country that the Labour Party don't think they should actually deal with or have any evidence-based approach to, but should turn into a culture war, which is incredibly irresponsible. So I think it's not letting them get away with the kind of crap they've got away with and actually holding them to account on that. But much more widely, I've always said I don't want to be concerned by Labour. I don't want to be disappointed with them. I want to replace them. And what happened yesterday is exactly what replacing looks like. And seat by seat, by-election by election, in 70 days' time in the local council level elections and in the Senate, where we can get Anthony Slaughter and Tessa Marshall elected, two brilliant Green Party members in Wales. We've never won Greens in the Senate before. I think that's exactly how we create full-blown panic in the Labour Party. And then I could see two directions, really. And I almost, it's not my job to decide which direction the Labour Party go. I've always said I'm really want to get to a place where the Labour Party are more worried about losing votes and seats to the Green Party than they are to reform. Well, last night was a huge brick in that wall about making it happen. So there is a scenario where we get a new Labour leader and they do have to try and at least make some concessions to the left. I say that and I don't believe it. I think the Labour Party have been so corporate captured at this point and so bought off by oil and gas companies, arms trade companies, private healthcare companies, gambling companies, that I don't see that ever happening. And the kind of small group of MPs that both of us could exchange in this conversation, they're never going to be Labour leader, as much as I have respect for those people. So I don't know what the theory of change is at this point for people who stick with the Labour Party or just go, one will go, I'm just waiting for another leadership election. It's not going to work. And that's why this election, again, was such an important moment, I would say, for the left and progressive movement more widely and the socialist movement, to actually go, the Green Party have tripled its membership. We've tripled our poll ratings. We're about to hit 200,000 members. This is all very exciting, but ultimately wouldn't mean anything until you've proven that you can win an election or win elections. We're well onto the road of doing that, not just kind of scrimping by the way, but doing it with flying colours. It's important to say that wasn't just the Green Party. That was lots of people who came out and campaigned for us, but it's very clear that that movement is there and it's ready to win.
Just final question. Look, no question, millions of people right now on the left, springing their step, grinning like Cheshire cats. But a lot of people with a lot of power, or some, not a lot of people, but people with power in the Labour Party, the Tories Reform, the media are very unhappy. Let's put it that way. They're rattled And you're already seeing you saw them going after you, for example, on the failed war on drugs, the fact that the drug industry is left in the hands of private criminal gangs who make vast amounts of money, and people who need help don't get help. We could go on, but I mean that they're going on. That's the sort of thing they're going to do now. They're just going to focus on that kind of thing and crowd everything else out. What's your strategy to deal with that? Because a lot of people on the left, here and elsewhere, have been destroyed because of their inability to fight back at that kind of campaign.
Well, there's a couple of things. First of all, I think we need to stand on business. I think you don't give an inch to the right and you don't give an inch to the establishment. I think when you believe something and something is true based in facts and information, you stick with the truth. Does that mean that, you can't stumble or you can't get something wrong or you can't be, tricked at some point? I'm sure that's going to happen, and I'll hold my hands up. There's a big difference, though, between a good faith attack and a bad faith attack. And I don't think this is naive, because I'm seeing it more and more, and I think it's partly the election we won last night, is I think people are seeing through the tricks of the legacy media and certainly the tricks of the Labour Party. That doesn't mean there won't be attacks sometimes where we've just got to get better at communicating. And I think that's partly being open, listening to people, being empathetic to people's concerns. I think there's a big difference between let's take drugs, for instance. It's a good example. There's a big difference between a Labour politician like David Lammy, who, by the way, a few years ago was saying we need to legalise drugs, or indeed Keir Starmer, who still won't answer the question about whether he's taken drugs, saying, oh no, you might take a public health approach to drugs. This is awful. I mean, that is so deeply cynical and awful. That's before I even begin to mention Mike Tapp. That's one set of people. I think there's nothing we need to do with them other than to beat them electorally and to never give an inch. Then there's another set of people, I think, are people who hear some of this and they're worried about it. I think it's important not to try and beat them, or not to try and, keep just shouting at them or lecturing them. Then that is about holding out a hand, making sure that you're explaining what it is that you're doing. But also not just explaining, because when you're explaining, you're losing, but telling those emotive stories that actually get people on board with the reasons that you're telling. And that's a really difficult job to do when for years people have been told one particular version of stories. But changing the British political system was never going to be easy. And actually, I think we're up to that as a movement. And I think we've got to be resilient in that. I think we've got to stick together. And there's that old thing about the left love to look for a traitor. And I think we've got to get over that as a movement and make sure that actually we're focusing on who the real threat to power is. That doesn't mean we need to agree on everything. If we agree, I think Mamdani's line that he stole from someone else, 7 out of 10 things, great, let's work together. 10 out of 10 things, that's bloody weird. Go see a therapist. I think there's a lot to be said about that line, actually, that we don't need to agree on everything. There just needs to be some fundamental principles and a sense that we're rebalancing power and wealth in this country, and that we're recognizing who the real threat is, and that's reform, and frankly, it's the Labour government at this point.
Amen to that. Well, for the first time in a long time, people are feeling hope. And the politics of fear, which has dominated this country for many years, is all of a sudden, for now, in retreat. And we will see how this is built on in the weeks and months ahead. But a lot of people are feeling, as I said, hope for the first time for a long time.
I'm feeling it's bloody epic. We're sending a plumber to Parliament.
I did actually speak to her this morning just to let everyone know behind it. She said she is hilarious. She's so mank, as you said. She said Reform and Labour beaten by a little woman plumber. 2 laughing emojis.
It's amazing. I mean, the line I love is she took on the billionaire donors and won. We should say that more.
She did. She definitely did. Amen to that. And I think that's not the first time she'll probably end up.
And on message. One more could you on?
She's so funny, honestly. Please like, subscribe with your thoughts, your comments, share the video. Zach, congratulations.
Thank you, Aaron.